Acts chapter 14. In Iconium. At Iconium, Paul and Barnabas went as usual into the city synagogue. There they spoke so effectively that a great number of Jews and Gentiles believed, but the Jews who refused to believe stirred up the Gentiles and poisoned their minds against the brothers. So Paul and Barnabas spent considerable time there, speaking boldly for the Lord, to confirm the message of his grace by enabling them to do miraculous signs and wonders. The people of the city were divided. Some sided with the Jews, others with the apostles. There was a plot afoot amongst the Gentiles and Jews, together with their leaders, to mistreat them and stone them. But they found out about it and fled to the Lycaum cities of Lystra and Derbe in the surrounding country, where they continued to preach the good news. So Paul and Barnabas are traveling around promoting Christianity. In Lystra and Derbe. In Lystra there sat a man crippled in his feet, who was lame from birth and had never walked. He listened to Paul as he was speaking. Paul looked directly at him, saw that he had faith to be healed, and called out, "Stand up on your feet." And that the man jumped up and began to walk. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they shouted in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in human form." Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul they called Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, brought bulls and wreaths to the city gates, because he and the crowd wanted to offer sacrifices to them. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard of this, they tore their clothing and rushed out into the crowd, shouting, "Men, why are you doing this? We too are only men, human like you. We are bringing you good news, telling you to turn from these worthless things to the living God, who made heaven and earth and sea and everything in them. In the past he let all nations go their own way, yet he has not left himself without testimony. He has shown kindness by giving you rain from heaven and crops in their seasons. He provides you with plenty of food and fills your hearts with joy." Even with these words they had difficulty keeping the crowd from sacrificing to them. Then some Jews came from Antioch and Iconium and won the crowd over. They stoned Paul and dragged him outside the city, thinking he was dead, but after the disciples had gathered around him, he got up and went back into the city. The next day he and Barnabas left for Derbe. They're like, "Hey, let's get out of here. There's people that are like stoning us." But I think it's found really interesting there in that part of Acts chapter, the first part of Acts chapter 14, is the places where they're promoting Christianity. There's paganism going on, and these people still worship Zeus and Hermes. And I've found that in academic teachings of the Bible, like the name Easter comes from the pagan god Esther, the god of fertility. If you ever wonder why they have Easter rabbits around Easter time, and how that is related to Christianity, when the early Christians were converting people to Christianity, they had a lot of pagan rituals. And around this time, early spring, where animals are most fertile, the most fertile of animal being the rabbit, the bunny rabbit, and Esther being the god of fertility. And that's where the word Easter comes from, Esther, the god of fertility, and that's why they have rabbits around Easter time. But back to the New Testament here, chapter 14 of Acts. I found it interesting also that Paul got stoned and they dragged him outside the city. He got up. He's like, "Whoa." He's like, "I'm okay." They returned to Antioch in Syria. They preached the good news in that city and won a large number of disciples. Then they returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, strengthening the disciples and encouraging them to remain true to their faith. "We must go through many hardships to enter the kingdom of God," they said. Paul and Barnabas appointed elders for them to each church, and with prayer and fasting committed them to the Lord, in which they had put their trust. After going through Pisidia, they came into Pamphylia, and when they had preached the word in Perga, they went down to Attalia. They all rhymes, I guess. From Attalia, they sailed back to Antioch, where they had been committed to the grace of God for the work that they had now completed. On arriving there, they gathered the church together and reported all that God had done through them, And he had opened the door of faith for the Gentiles, and they stayed there for a long time with the disciples. That was Acts chapter 14. Click the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did.